Okay. So, hello, this is Tytti, and this is our Finn horse Usko. He's a 10-year-old gelding, and he was trained as a harness racer until he was about 5 years old. After that, they decided that he was not good at harness racing, so he was sold on, and just a couple of months before we bought him, he was basic trained, so he knew how to walk, trot and canter and jump a little bit.
Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and I'll take it over from here, but I thought I'd let her go ahead and tell us all about her horse in her own words, and quite frankly, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to pronounce her name or the name of the horse. But anyway, we welcome and thank you for sending in your clip. And this is a very interesting horse. Was a trotter, as she said, which is certainly better than being a horse that used to, do the rack or gait or something like that. At least it was doing a natural gait. But these horses tend to be a little long in the back. And we can see with this one, if you look just behind the saddle there, there's a little bit of a dip there, a little bit of a hole there. So that tells me he hasn't been working over his back at times in his life. But she's doing a very good job of getting this horse to stretch forward here in the trot. It just needs to be a little bit more active. But that's good right there, though it could be a little more active. Now, I'm going to answer one of your questions. You're talking about how do I get him to go on a little more actively. And the first thing I can tell you right away is that you need to just get yourself a longer lunge whip. I'm watching you here and you just can't even seem to get anywhere near this horse and you're cracking and cracking the whip at him. And pretty soon, if you don't actually touch the horse with the whip occasionally, which I see you trying to do there, and enough to get him to move off briskly, that they'll just end up forgetting about what you're doing and, going on doing what they want to do. So the first thing is to go out to the local tack shop or order, whatever you do from where you are, and just try to find yourself the longest lunge whip you can find. Now, they also make some that are kind of for women in the sense that some of these big heavy lunge whips can be very difficult for a woman to hold on to. So they have some that kind of have more of a string that's lighter and easy for a woman to be able to handle. So you might want to look into one of those, but it's important that you be able to get close enough to the horse to be able to get the job done, which is to be able to touch him occasionally. I suggest all of my students, and I can see watching you use this, that here you're very, sometimes you're flicking it up and down and just making a sound with it. That really isn't what you want to do. You always want to run the lash out when you want to use the whip and touch the horse with it. A horse can feel a fly on its side. It can certainly hear you when you are using that whip, or it can feel that when you're using the whip. So get yourself a longer lunge whip so that you can touch him, and then if you need to, actually walk a bigger circle yourself so that you can keep the horse in front of your leg, or in front of the whip, as we say. I like to think when I'm lunging that I'm really just riding from the ground, and the lunge whip is my leg, and of course the rein is my rein. So the first thing just as when I ride, it's not stop that you need, it's go that you need. So by sending the horse on forward with this whip and being able to tap him with it. Now, I tell all of my students when they first start this to take a whip in the backyard someplace away from horses so you're not driving them crazy by making a snapping noise. And put even a target on a tree of some type or other at about the height that you would use it on the horse. I mean, there's only 3 places that we use the whip on the horse, and that is in that fleshy part above the hock, the bulbous part there, that is the fleshy part of his buttock, so to speak, and then right on the side of the horse where your legs would be. And the only other place that we touch a horse sometimes, if a horse spins on you, we can touch them on the shoulder to get them to move back around in the direction they're supposed to be going. But so you might need to be able to accurately touch those spots whenever you need to do that. So I highly suggest that you practice, and of course practice with both hands. I find some people can lunge a horse very well in one direction and they can't use their opposite hand. So get a long lunge whip, get in your backyard, practice with it till you can hit those spots over and over again. And then when you use the whip, use it, touch him with it almost every time, because he probably is going to need it. He seems to be the type of horse that's already learned that, unless you're close enough to him, there's not much you're going to be able to do about it. However, having said that, you are getting a pretty good stretch here. It's just not consistently forward enough. It's not swinging over his back enough. But he is getting into it at times when you get him there. So that's a good thing. Now, the other thing I'm going to say is I see this saddle is kind of bouncing a little bit behind, and I've, of course, watched this video through entirely, so I know it's coming. It also seems like the panel is very thin there that you're sitting on. That is, the saddle's panel seems very worn out and very thin, not much support. You know, it looks like it sits up on the spine of the horse too much for me. Now, from what I can tell from this angle, I have a feeling that the gullet is probably very narrow, and it looks to me like it kind of stabs into his shoulders in the front a little bit, and then I see it popping up all the time in the back. So that tells me that it's kind of tight in the front. So I would suggest taking a look at our videos on saddle fit and maybe taking a look at what you're riding in there. Now, the good thing about the saddle is it does bring your weight up to the front of the saddle, so it doesn't sit you too far back. But my problem with it is I have a feeling that it sits you too much on top of the spine for comfort of the horse. This is a little better trot starting to get here now. Still not stretching in quite as much as we'd like, stretching down as much as we'd like him to do, but it's getting better, getting a little more active. He gets really quite closely there very often. And then he just kind of tends to lose it. Right here, same thing. This is because your whip isn't long enough. So he starts kind of pointing his hindquarters at you. That's a defensive position that the horse takes. You know, he's kind of loading his guns on you. So when I work a horse, I'm always sure that the hindquarters are moving away from me first. That's the first thing I establish, and that the horse will stay out at the end of the line at whatever length I decide it's going to be, but that he will yield his hindquarters away to the outside. That also, of course, gets the horse a step deeper inside under itself with the inside hind leg, and of course push up through the back, which is what we desire anyway. I very often work my horses a little bit shoulder forward, so that's what I suggest you do here. You see him counter bending like this, bring him on a little smaller circle where you know you can get him more active with the whip, and then try to bring the shoulders in just a little bit, so he has to swing those hindquarters out just a little bit and starts to step underneath his own body a little bit. But you're having some really good moments with this horse. But you see what I'm talking about when you see these pictures right here, like you can see behind the saddle there. You can see that there's a little dip there. So that should come up and flatten out as time goes on. Remember, you know, people are often asking me, well, you know, when do we go in the other direction? Well, that is, bring the horse up from the stretch. Well, we bring the horses up from the stretch every day as far as they can come, but you've got to get that full range of motion first. Now, that's really looking good. He gets a good moment there, and then he kind of falls in, you know, back into the walk again and kind of loses it. But he's having some moments where you're really getting him there, and I can certainly see that if you build on what you've got here. Now, that's quite nice there. There he's beginning to swing through a little more. Good. Now, as we go into the trot work here, the biggest thing I can say for you, you have a pretty good position, but like many people, you're kind of rounding your shoulders down into the horse. So you need to lighten your load on the back of this horse, and especially in that saddle that doesn't fit him all that well. But once again, as I said, the one thing I do like about it, at least it doesn't sit you 2 foot back, you know, on the back of the horse the way a park seat or some of these saddles do. Because we want to sit up to the front. We want to sit near the horse's withers. That's the strongest point of the horse's back. So what I need you to do is to stretch your upper body up, like yoga once again, stretching your shoulders up, and you're lifting the top of your chest and engaging your abdominal muscles a little more when you're riding. Your leg position is all that is good. The other thing that I wouldn't do here, and maybe it's because he's trotting off, I'm not quite sure what you're trying to do here, but there he's getting a little brisker trot. But he has moments when he softens into the contact. You know, you're not trying to alter the frame by pulling his head down, and that's wonderful. There he's starting to stretch into the contact. But once again, if you will just lift your chest up in your rising trot, and you can see even in your downward transition, you tend to like let your shoulders go as you make the downward transition, which of course lets the weight all drop down onto his back. So we don't want to do that. And with a horse at this level, you wouldn't want to do all these stop, start, stop, starts. You want to get going in the trot, get it swinging and active, and keep it there. You know, until a horse can make, or that is, until a horse is consistent in its contact with the bridle, you don't want to make a lot of transitions, because what's going to happen is just what's happening to you. Is every time you come back to a walk here, he just drops his back out from underneath you and hollows. And you kind of have to then go through a process of getting him back a little bit, you know. So I would suggest staying in the trot for longer periods of time. When I work my young horses, I pretty much do all my walk work, then I go and do all my trot work. You know, if they're a little tired, I let them come back to the walk and have a little breather. Then I bring them back to the trot work, and then from the trot work into the canter. Never skipping any gears on a horse at this level. In other words, never trying to go from the walk to the canter, because he wouldn't be able to do it, and do it correctly. You might be able to get them to do it, but if they're not engaged to the back, what they'll end up doing is just kind of lifting up in the shoulder and then falling into the canter, as opposed to starting the canter from the hindquarters, lowering behind and engaging the outside hind leg. So once again here, just too many of these transitions. Just keep going, get yourself stretched up, get him in a steady trot, and just keep it there as long as you can in that stretch, trying to get as deep as you can for as long as you can. That is within reason, 5 or 10 minutes there at a time, and let him come back to a stretching walk. And then pretty much be done. I think what I see here more than anything in the riding, to me, it just seemed like it went on a little too long. He had some good moments, and I would be quicker to reward those good moments and just be done for the day. Now here, he's not really coming through enough behind. His head is up in the air, and you can see he's kind of splitting in half, so to speak. As I like to say, the back is dropping out from underneath him. The hocks don't have, there's no thrust off the ground because his back is not round. That is, the horse is not going to thrust. So you kind of feel like when you rise like that, like you're kind of rising out of a hole. So once again, there's too many of these downwards transitions that don't really have any meaning. He just comes back and hollows again on you, and you kind of start the process all over again. So I would just keep a more consistent work in the trot, get my trot work done, and then come back to a walk to finish in a stretch with him. I would not canter this horse every day. From what I'm seeing with this horse, he's not nearly over his back. And when you get to the canter, it's just not real good. And that's mostly because he's not strong enough to even do the trot work correctly. So it's kind of like there's not much point in going, into the next gear if the gear before it is, has still got lumps in it, so to speak. So we need to get that trot work much more consistent, more forward and swinging and stretching into it and keeping it consistent for periods of time. And then with a horse like this, what I would do is come back and try the canter every couple of weeks or a week or so. If you read the old Spanish riding school manual, they would ride a horse for a full year before they would ever canter it. And then, of course, when you ask for the canter, the horse is strong enough to do it. So that's my suggestion, is less of that canter. The canter never really improves by doing more canter. The canter improves by doing more trot work and strengthening the horse over its top line, and then magically the canter just comes around all by itself. But like right here, while he's cantering, he's not actually cantering through the back. He's just kind of hollow. And once again, we made another downward transition, though that one was a little better, and he came back to a little more swinging trot on this one. It's a little livelier trot, maybe perhaps out of the canter, but he needs to stretch still more deeply down into the contact. And then she comes back to a walk again. So as I said, I would definitely suggest much less of these transitions. Once again, like that one she just did wasn't of any value because she was walking hollow, she trotted hollow, she came back to a hollow walk. So once again, get the horse swinging there, that's getting better, but send him on. She just about gets him right, and then she kind of decides to stop. And once again, at this horse's level, we wouldn't want to do much sitting trot either, and you wouldn't want to do it in the saddle that you're sitting in, because I feel you really need to look at that, as I'm seeing the back end pop up so much and it looks so tight on his shoulders there. And the same thing with the canter in this direction. It was kind of the same thing, very hollow, not much happening there. And therefore, not really very valuable as a training tool. And here he's kind of getting hollow. It's kind of what I said before. Like, I almost felt like the best parts of this ride were at the beginning, and now the horse is looking kind of more tired to me, and the back end is moving, with less energy and less thrust off the ground. And, perhaps she said that he had been quite wild on the lunge line. Perhaps he wore himself out that day. But this is a horse with a very long back, as trotters tend to be, but yet he has quite a short, thick neck, which will have its own set of problems, because the horse is not balanced, so to speak, by nature as well as it might be. It's a little bit downhill, it's a little bit long in the back and a little short in the neck. So we have to try to compensate for that as much as we can by getting the horse as long as we can through the back. Now once again, here's sitting trot. I wouldn't do this at all. The horse is not coming through enough. Once again, there's no point in sitting on the back of the horse if its back isn't round. It will only damage the horse in the long run. So once again, same here in the rising trot. I need you to stretch up a little more, get your shoulders out, back, and just send the horse through. It's almost there. You're doing a really good job. You're just trying to focus on things that the horse isn't quite ready to do yet, which are all these transitions. So just keep your rhythm consistent. Just wait for the horse to stretch into the contact and keep it going like that. Once again, same thing here with the canter, with all that trot work into the canter. So there we basically had a hollow trot with the horse's head up in the air into a hollow canter. So those things would not be of much value to the training of the horse. Here she comes back to a little livelier trot, but still we need to get him stretching out. This horse needs to get all the way down and stay there most of the time until he develops more strength, and you begin to see that weak area across the loin begin to strengthen. That is, you'll see it actually fill up. Once again, you see how you sit in the saddle there, he immediately throws his head. He's doing that because, I'm sure his back is not comfortable, and as short as his gaits are, and once again, I suspect the saddle there a little bit. I'm not going to say 100%, but I suspect that you may have a little bit of a problem, because as soon as you sit in the saddle, he throws his head up in the air, which usually tells me there's either a saddle fit or the horse is extremely. This horse doesn't look that weak in the back, which makes me suspect, as I can from whatever distance I am from you, that it may be that. This is looking a little better here. Good. More like what he needs to be doing. Better trot there. There, that's better. He still needs to get the neck a lot longer, but that's way better than it was before. And of course, you're in a rising trot. And now look how much better his trot is. But once again, you come back to a walk too soon. I would have kept that going till you get it really consistent. Once again, you don't want to do a lot of transitions until the horse is consistent in the contact and will stretch into that contact and stay there. Then you begin doing transitions, but without dropping your back so fast. You're in a big hurry to get your weight on the back of the horse, and as soon as you do, because he doesn't have enough strength to support you, he's immediately just kind of freezing in his tracks, and that's never what we want to do. We want to take our time. At this level, you ought to be, as I tell my students all the time, I don't care if it takes you 10 times around the circle to bring the horse to a walk, if the horse continues to step through in the walk and it's a supple transition. That's what's important to the ultimate goal of training. So now she's changing direction here a little bit. Once again, I'd like to see you just get right off his back and send him on forward. You can see the hind leg is dragging a little bit in this direction now. Once again, you need to just let go for a minute till you get a much more swinging and active trot going. That's a little better there. Gets a little better. Sometimes I feel like your turns are a little tight for him. That's not a bad little leg yield there, though. Good. Send it on. And once again, same thing here. You need to stretch your body up, carry yourself a little more so your shoulders are not so down. And once again, when I see that saddle go by, it just looks like, and you see how it kind of pops up every time you rise to the trot. So that tells me it's really not fitting and is probably pinching the horse at his shoulders, which may have something to do with his discomfort there. So, you wouldn't go out to play tennis with a tennis racket that was your grandfather's and had been in a closet for 20 years and was completely warped. Yet people will do this with saddles. I see people come in to ride horses on saddles that are unbelievably worthless and worn out, and yet they still want to put this thing on this animal's back and ride on it. That saddle, what a saddle is for is to distribute your weight down the rib cage and off of the horse's spine so that we don't put pressure directly on the spine. That's what saddles have always been for. So by having an ill-fitting saddle, you sort of not only negate that, but you also make it even worse by having pinch points where the horses can get sore. When you see horses that have white spots around their withers and these sort of things, and that's a sign that a saddle pinched the horse so badly that it deadened the skin and it deadened those hair follicles to the point that there was probably a sore there at some point that may have healed up. So always look for those when you go out to look at horses. Look around their withers and see if you see a lot of little white spots and white hairs, or even big spots of white hair. Now, this is what you get into with this turn on the forehand. Now, all that's happening here is his head is coming straight up. He's hollow. He is moving his legs around, but as a gymnastic exercise, this really has no value, and I believe is being done too soon. The basic goal of, as Nuno Oliveira used to say, anything done correctly is classical. So you can do that classically if you keep the horse over his back. But interestingly enough, the turns on the forehand tend to hollow the horse more than turns on the haunches. Other than opening gates, they're not a real useful exercise, because what usually happens is just what's happening to you here. He's just kind of swinging his hindquarters around and throwing his head up in the air and kind of, dragging his legs around with no rhythm underneath him. Though this is a little better because you're doing a leg yield here. And so that's really what you ought to keep this to, is a leg yield. And as time goes on, once again, remember, your goal in the leg yield is to get the horse longer, which you're doing here. So that's what your goal also has to be in those turns on the forehand. If you can't keep him working over his back, it really has no value, and you're only, encouraging him to go hollow. So I highly recommend we stay away from those for this time. It was great to meet you two. I look forward to seeing another video from you. You did a great job. You're on the right track. Get yourself that longer lunge whip and you'll be all set. And I look forward to seeing another video of you and your horse before too long. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Thank you very much for joining us today.